today's episode of Just Cook, we're going to make southern dressing. Now, I have all my ingredients here. I've already made the cornbread. Now you can use a box mix or you can make it from bagged cornbread. Bagged cornbread has a recipe right on the back. This is what I used. It is a yellow cornmeal. It takes 2 cups and milk and an egg and oil. You do not have to use a cast iron frying pan to bake your cornbread. You can use any baking dish. You could even use a muffin pan because we're just going to crumble it all up anyway. So it doesn't really matter what it looks like.
What's the difference between yellow and white cornbread?
Yellow tends to be a little more sweet, and I actually do like white cornbread for the dressing. But we have yellow. That's what I have to work with because with the pandemic, we just work with what we can get right now. Right now we're using yellow cornbread and it'll be just fine.
And did you have to grease that pan that you made the cornbread in?
Yes, that pan had to be greased. What I like to do so that it's not overly oily, the recipe calls for a 1/4 cup of vegetable oil that goes in the actual cornbread. But then you're supposed to put a couple of tablespoons in your pan and heat that pan in the oven. So I go ahead and make the 1/4 cup and I just pour a little bit into my pan. I put my pan in the oven while I mix up the cornbread. Then I take the pan out of the oven and it's ready to go. So, first thing we're going to do, I do put Jimmy Dean breakfast sausage. We use Country Mild today. I put that in my cornbread. You do not have to use meat if you want it vegetarian. So I'm going to put those to the side. I also put boiled eggs in my dressing, which again is optional. Dressing is one of those things. I'm just going to show you the basic recipe. You can add walnuts, cranberries, golden raisins, pecans, it's just whatever your preference of like is. So we get a bowl and we're going to take our cornbread out. This cornbread is cooked pretty dry, which is fine because we're going to add broth to it anyway. So we're going to crumble all the cornbread into the pan, or into a bowl, sorry.
So how many people will this dressing feed?
Good question. This dressing is going in a 13 by 9 pan. And it depends on what you're making with it. If you're having it with baked chicken or turkey or pork loin or something like that, then, it should feed, I would think, 6 people with a decent portion. My husband loves dressing, which is why I learned to make it, and he could eat half a pan by himself. So, yeah, it just depends. But it is going in a 13 by 9, so it'll make a good size side dish. You could always double the recipe as well. This cornbread's a little dark on the bottom because I used the pan that I fried my sausage in this morning so that it would give it some extra sausage flavor. And because of that, it got some of the dark sausage on the bottom of the cornbread. You can use box mixes of cornbread, but I do not recommend using, well, I don't know if I can. Don't use a sweet cornbread for this. I do like making mine homemade because it just turns out with a better consistency.
And how long will it bake?
The dressing or the cornbread?
The dressing.
It will bake for, I bake mine for 30 minutes because we like our vegetables to be a little bit al dente, kind of crisp. If you want your vegetables more soft, you can always cook it longer. It also depends on what consistency you like your dressing as. Some people like it a little more moist and some like it more dry. So that will determine how long you cook it as well. Of course, the longer you cook it, the drier it's going to be.
So what would happen if I took it out of the oven and it was very dry, the dressing?
You can't do a whole...
Can I save it?
You can try to save it. I would just recommend making a gravy to go with it, which some people serve gravy with their dressing anyway. Alright, that's all done. But we'll set that aside for now. I'm going to chop up my sausage. You could try to pour a little bit of extra broth on top and see if it would soak down into it. I've never really tried that, so I can't say for sure if it would work or not. I know with a cake sometimes they poke holes in the top of it with like a toothpick or a fork before you pour something on top, and that way it soaks down in. So I would try that, maybe poking some holes on top of it before pouring. And use a hot broth. Always heat up your broth that you're going to put on it.
So if I was vegetarian, you think tofu would go well in it, or would I just omit it entirely?
I would omit it entirely. I wouldn't really try tofu in this. A lot of dressings are meatless anyway because they're usually served with the meat, like a turkey or a chicken. But we like the flavor of the sausage in there, so we go ahead and add it. You're going to put in 1 whole onion. We're going to chop our onion up. Try to use a fairly large onion. I should have had this peeled already, sorry. But I wanted to show you how to peel an onion because some may not even know how to peel an onion. If you want to try to reduce the tears that form from an onion, you can rinse it under cold water. I'm not positive if that theory actually works or not, but sometimes it does help. I like to just cut it in half like that, and then I turn it, and you see the little veins down it. Go down these veins of the onion, then turn it sideways, and then go on this side. The grease from the sausage have my fingers a little bit slippery right now, so I'm trying to go carefully on this one so that I don't cut myself. And you're not looking for a perfect chop anyway because you're just mixing it in. You don't have to go down every single vein, of course, because there's quite a few of the little veins there. You just want to, it just gives you a little bit of a guide there so that you can dice up your onion. And you could put it in a little chopping machine too if you have one of those and you don't like to cut the onion by hand. So we're going to add that. You want about 3 stalks of celery. I've already chopped most of them.
And how big should they be?
We're going to chop this last one that I saved. Just wash it, cut your dirty ends off, and any other, imperfections that you may have. Cut this end off. And yes, we're going to use the leaves in this just to give it makes it pretty and it gives it a little bit of extra celery flavor. If the stalk is big, cut it in half and then just dice it up. Well, not dice it, slice it. You don't want it too big because it won't cook. But you can really just cut it any size you want. And my eyes are definitely burning. And here's the rest of the onion that we have, our celery that we have. We're gonna add that later. Chicken broth. You want a whole 32-ounce carton.
So you can't use beef?
I've not tried it with beef. You could definitely use vegetable broth if you wanted to go vegetarian. You want to heat this up in a pot, which I have mine heated already. Now we're going to add our seasoning.
Is there any real difference between beef and chicken broth? I mean, what is the difference?
Well, one's beef and one's chicken, so.
Oh.
We're going to add pepper, sage, celery salt. Now, this celery salt is quite salty. It's much saltier than the kind I got from the grocery store. This is I ran out and I ordered this online, and I've noticed that it is extremely salty. So I don't use as much as I would the regular celery salt from the store, but because this has salt in it, I don't add any extra salt.
Well, why don't you just use salt since you've already got celery in there anyway?
Well, more flavor. We want as much flavor as possible. So I've put the seasonings in a bowl together already. About a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, 2 teaspoons of sage, and 2 to 3 celery salt, but that depends on how salty your celery salt is. So you may only go 2 if you use this type of version that's extra salty. So we're going to add those to our bowl. Now we're going to add heated up chicken broth, which I've already heated up the whole carton in a pot. I'm just going to pour it right in. And now we're just going to stir it up.
And what is that you're using?
This is my new spurtle.
And what is a spurtle?
Well, I just got it, so it's something new that I saw advertised, and I got me a set. It's kind of like a cross between a spatula and a spoon. Now this is a bit tricky because it depends on how dry or moist you like your your dressing. We like ours kind of dry here, but if you want it a little more moist, a little more soupy, looks like you could probably add about another can of broth to this, or a half a can. But you don't want to put too much in there, as you don't want it too soupy, but you could always cook it long enough to firm it up. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now we could give it a taste for our seasonings to see if we needed to add more, because there's nothing raw in here. Perfect. Really good. You're going to put it in a 13x9 pan. You don't have to grease it or anything. Spread it out, pat it down a little bit. Now, as far as the eggs go, I usually just put a couple of rings on top. You can mix them in, it doesn't really matter how you put them in there.
Will you include the yolk?
Typically you would include the yolk. My husband doesn't like the yolk in there, so I'm going to remove the yolk. It doesn't matter if it's rings or pieces. In fact, I changed my mind. I'm going to stir the egg in so that it don't sit and dry out and kind of burn on top. It may not cook very well like that. I'm just going to kind of mash it in a little bit. And that's it. You're just going to put this in a 350-degree oven for approximately 30 minutes. Like we said, if you like it drier, cook it longer. If you like your vegetables a little softer, cook it longer. Now it just goes in the oven. And we'll be right back to show you the finished product. And here we have our steaming finished product after about 30 minutes of baking. So you just scoop it out and eat it. Make gravy if you like gravy, but enjoy Southern dressing. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and check back because I will be putting more videos on weekly. And if there's something you want made in particular, please don't hesitate to mention it in the comments and I'll do my best to accommodate. Thank you so much.